She doesn't announce herself. She doesn't have to. One moment the courtyard of Caelrith Keep is exactly what it always is. Cold stone, cold breath, the muted shuffle of boots and cloaks and men pretending to be still. The next moment, Elyra Voss is simply there, standing beneath the cracked basin of the old fountain, and everything changes the way things change when something irreversible finally happens. No trumpet, no herald, just presence. The wrong kind, in the wrong place, at the wrong hour. Rhydan is mid-step when he sees her. His boot pauses just above the stone. Not a stumble, something slower and more deliberate than that, like his body made a decision his mind hasn't caught up with yet. She's travel-worn. Her cloak carries the dark geometry of melted snow. A thin curl of damp hair is plastered to her temple, and she hasn't dressed for this. Whatever this is. She's come as herself, not as a petitioner, not as a supplicant, not as anyone's mistake making itself small. She doesn't bow. The absence of it spreads through the courtyard like a sound, like a very specific kind of silence that only exists after something expected doesn't happen. Steel boots scrape. A guard shifts weight, unsure whether the absence of instruction is instruction. The Western House banners hang perfectly still against the stone, watching the way fabric watches, without blinking. Rhydan does not speak. He understands the geometry of this. Speaks too soon. He acknowledges her on her terms. Waits too long. He loses the room to the space she's already occupying. So he holds. He waits. He keeps his eyes on her and thinks about nothing, the way you think about nothing right before something matters too much. She's looking at him. Not up at him. Not past him toward whatever authority fills the space behind his shoulders. At him. Like rank is a convention she learned once and then decided wasn't her problem. And then something moves. Behind her, a small shape, slightly delayed, tucked into the folds of her cloak. A child leans just enough into the light to be seen. Rhydan does not step back. He doesn't do anything. He becomes very still in the way that statues are still, not by choice but because something inside has stopped deciding how to be a body. The boy's face turns. Dark hair uncombed, falling across his brow in that particular way that falls. Not a style, just nature doing what it does. A thin scar just below the chin, old enough to be silver. Skin pale from cold and travel. And then his eyes find Rhydan's eyes, and something cracks open in the very center of Rhydan's chest. Not pain. Not recognition exactly. Something older than either. Something that doesn't live in memory, but in the space just behind it, the part of you that knows things before you know them. Because those eyes, they don't resemble his. They don't look like his. They simply are same weight, same color, same exact quality of stillness. The way this boy holds a gaze without flinching isn't stubbornness. It isn't performance. It's inheritance. It's something passed down through the body before anyone had a chance to teach it. Rhydan hears a gauntlet scrape behind him. A guard, shifting, unsure. He lifts one hand. Doesn't look. The sound stops. No one moves. Elyra adjusts her stance. Just barely. Not retreating. Not advancing. Just shifting, slightly, so that the line of her body falls between Rhydan and the child in a way that isn't dramatic. Isn't defiant. Is simply deliberate. A mother's geometry. It lands in Rhydan's chest like something thrown from a height. She's protecting him, not from danger. From proximity. From Rhydan himself, who has not yet decided what he is in this moment, king or something else, something without a title. You've crossed into Caelrith without summons. His voice comes out even. It always does. The crown teaches you that before it teaches you anything else, the voice is the first thing people read, so the voice is the last thing you let break. Elyra doesn't answer immediately. Her eyes move, just once, toward the tiers of the court behind him, the elevated stone steps where power arranges itself in rows, where the Western houses watch with very careful expressions. Then back to him. I didn't come for permission. The boy's hand tightens against the edge of her cloak. Rhydan notices the knuckles going pale before he can decide not to notice. Fingers small but steady. A grip that has learned over time not to slip. The kind of grip that belongs to a child who has been moved too many times and has gotten very good at holding on to the only constant thing. Something presses against the inside of Rhydan's ribs. Faint. Formless.
Wrong.
He ignores it. You came into my court, he says. You will answer. A flicker crosses her face. Gone in under a second. Not fear, something harder to name, something compressed and old. You made it clear, she says quietly. I had no place in it. The words don't rise. They don't sharpen into accusation or reach for effect. They fall clean, the way a fact falls, not because you're performing truth, but because you've been carrying it for long enough that putting it down requires no particular effort. That makes them worse. Fabric shifts behind Rhydan. One measured step against stone, and he knows without turning who it is, Sereth Halvain, moving the way Sereth always moves, with the complete absence of urgency that is itself a kind of urgency. Her presence settles behind him like a drawn line. Quiet.
Precise.
Impossible to ignore. The court feels it. Weight redistributes. Expectation sharpens. State your purpose, Rhydan says. The boy leans around Elyra now. Curious. Careful. But more curious than careful. He's at that age where curiosity still wins. Their eyes meet again. Closer this time. Too close. Rhydan's breath stalls. There is no mistaking what he sees. The angle of the brow. The specific quality of stillness in the gaze, not emptiness, but patience. The particular way the child tilts his head, measured, assessing like he's already deciding something that takes adults years to arrive at. This isn't resemblance. Resemblance is something you have to look for. This is something you can't look away from. The thought arrives before Rhydan can stop it. This is mine. And once it lands, it doesn't leave. It settles somewhere below language, below decision, somewhere the court can't reach. Elyra shifts again. Enough to remind him, without words, that access to this child isn't given. Not anymore. Not by her. You don't need my purpose, she says. Lower now. Not submission, control. You just need to decide what you're going to do now that you see him. A murmur escapes the court before it can be swallowed. Sereth's presence tightens behind Rhydan like a question that needs answering.
He should end this.
Remove her. Remove the child. Restore the order that keeps a court feeling like it knows what it is. That's what kings do. That's what he has always done. The clean motion, the decisive gesture that returns everything to legible ground. But his feet don't move, because the boy is still looking at him. And that look doesn't ask anything. It doesn't plead. It doesn't perform understanding it doesn't have. It just waits. Rhydan steps forward. One step. Stone crunches under his heel, and the sound carries the way sounds carry in a held breath. Elyra doesn't retreat. Her spine straightens instead, that particular straightening that has nothing to do with pride and everything to do with bracing. Not yielding. Bracing.
He stops.
The boy doesn't. Another small step, pulled forward by something he probably can't name yet. Elyra's hand moves, fast, stops just short of pulling him back. She lets him stand there. That choice. God, that choice. It hangs in the air of the courtyard and refuses to leave. Rhydan lowers himself, slightly. Not all the way. Just enough to bring his eyes closer to the boy's level. The court stills again with a different kind of stillness now, the kind that knows it's watching something that doesn't have a procedure. Kings don't lower themselves here. Not like this. Not for this. What is your name? The boy glances up at Elyra. She doesn't nod. Doesn't guide him. Just watches, the way you watch someone you trust to find their own footing. The silence stretches. Then, Cain. The name sits between them. Simple. Complete. Rhydan repeats it once. Inside. Where no one can hear.
Cain.
It fits too easily. Like something that was always going to be called that. His gaze lifts, slowly, to Elyra's face. Her expression hasn't changed. But something behind her eyes has. Something that wasn't there moments ago. Not hope. Something that looks, if you get close enough, like a woman who has already lived the outcome of this moment in her imagination and found it insufficient. Like someone who is ready for inadequacy and has made her peace with it. Sereth's voice arrives just behind his ear. This is a mistake. Quiet.
Certain.
Not urgent. She doesn't do urgent. Just that tone that occupies the register just below command. Rhydan doesn't turn. If he turns, he answers her. If he answers her, he decides. And he has not decided. Not yet. He looks back at the boy, at Cain, who holds his gaze with that same unsettling steadiness. No fear. No calculation. Just the quiet certainty of someone who is exactly where they are and is at peace with not knowing yet what that means. Something inside Rhydan tightens, then shifts. A sense of something that should have been present from the beginning and wasn't. Not recognition of a face. Recognition of an absence. A shape in the air where something should have stood. He lifts his eyes to Elyra. What is he to you? The words come out the wrong way. Measured. Controlled.
Wrong.
Like he's asking about a legal relationship when the truth is he's asking about everything, all at once, and the words don't have room for everything. Elyra's jaw sets. The first visible crack, not in strength but in restraint. You don't get to ask that now. The court holds its breath. Something tilts in the floor of Rhydan's certainty. Because she didn't deny it. She didn't deflect or misdirect or soften. She closed the question the way you close a door on a room you've already lived in and moved out of. As if the answer had been given once somewhere in a moment that no longer belongs to either of them. His gaze drops, just briefly, back to Cain. And, in that second, the truth finishes arriving. Not as thought. Not as conclusion. As something past both. Something final and unavoidable and already done. He looks back up at Elyra. The silence stretches. And then it doesn't break. It simply becomes understanding. This is his son. And every eye in Caelrith Keep is about to realize it at the same moment he does. Unafraid. The realization doesn't spread like a whisper.
It drops.
Heavy, into the center of the courtyard, and everything around it bends toward it. A guard near the western pillar shifts stance, metal scraping stone. Then another. The sounds multiply, small, controlled adjustments, people trying to anchor themselves to something that just slipped. Rhydan feels every pair of eyes rotate toward him. Not toward Elyra. Not toward the child.
Toward him.
Measuring.
Calculating.
Deciding what this means, what it costs, what position to take before the positions are assigned. He doesn't look away from Cain. The boy hasn't moved. Still standing where he stepped, shoulders squared in that way that no child should have learned yet. The cold has turned the tips of his ears pink, the edge of his nose. His breath comes in thin, visible clouds. And through all of it, that steadiness is harder to absorb than fear ever could be. Fear, Rhydan knows how to answer. This requires something else. Sereth steps fully into the open space, her presence entering the courtyard with that practiced ease that carries authority not because it demands it, but because it never doubts it. Pale silver threads trace her cloak's edges, catching what little the winter sky offers in the way of light. She places herself at Rhydan's side, close enough to read as alignment. "Your Majesty," she says, clear enough to reach the edges of the gathered court. Not loud, controlled. The word as both acknowledgment and steering mechanism. Her gaze takes in Elyra, Cain, and Rhydan in a single flicker. Files it. A complication. Rhydan doesn't respond. The silence deepens. Elyra shifts her weight. The heel of her boot against frost-hardened stone. A small sound, but in this particular stillness, it arrives like a signal. She isn't looking at the court. Isn't looking at Sereth. Only at him. Waiting for outcome. Not for acknowledgement. She's past waiting for acknowledgement. For outcome. Sereth tilts her head. Just enough. A quiet cue. End this. He doesn't. He steps past her instead. The movement is small, but it breaks formation. A murmur escapes through the gathered houses before it's swallowed. Rhydan stops a pace closer to Elyra and Cain. Too close for dismissal. Too close for neutrality. A position that has already said something without using words. Sereth's fingers tighten once, at her side. Brief.
Gone.
What you've brought here, she says, addressing the space now rather than any individual, arrives at an unfortunate time. Her tone is perfectly even, but the words carry. They travel through the courtyard, through the watching nobles, through the envoys on the upper steps. Timing, not truth. She reframes it cleanly, professionally. Elyra's mouth curves. Not quite a smile. Timing seems to matter here. Heads turn, attention shifting away from Rhydan toward her. That is dangerous. That is the kind of dangerous that requires correction. He doesn't correct it, because Kane steps forward again. One more step. Close enough now that the space between them feels like a held breath. Like two people on either side of a door, one holding it open and neither sure who should move first. Elyra's hand rises, almost catches him, stops. Lets him stand there. Again. Sereth sees it. Her gaze sharpens. The calculation changes. This is no longer a disruption to be processed and removed. It is a presence.
A horn sounds. Low.
From beyond the outer walls. The note travels through stone and into bone, and doesn't leave. Every head turns. No one misreads it. The northern houses. Sereth moves immediately. One step closer to Rhydan, her voice compressing to a controlled edge. They're early. Not surprise. Recognition. Like she already knew this was a variable and was hoping it would land somewhere else. The timing locks into place inside Rhydan's mind. Pressure narrows. The oath assembly will not wait, Sereth continues. Each word precise. A reminder. A boundary. An entire argument condensed into 4 words. Rhydan feels the weight of it arrive alongside everything else already here. This moment doesn't exist in isolation. It intersects with alliances, with the structure of a kingdom that doesn't bend without breaking, with 27 years of decisions made in rooms that looked like certainty. Elyra glances, once toward the gate, then back. Still no plea, still no demand, just presence, which, more than anything else, disrupts the pattern. She is not asking to be restored. She is not asking to be seen. She already stands here, past all the places she was supposed to stop. Rhydan's jaw tightens. The choice space narrows. If he removes her, the court stabilizes. If he allows her to remain, everything begins to tilt. Sereth softer now, for the sake of the realm. Not a command. A line drawn. Rhydan looks past Elyra toward the high archway, toward the road that disappears into the valleys. Then back to Kane. To the boy who stands in his court, as if he belongs there. As if he always has. The horn sounds again. Closer. Longer. And Rhydan's voice, when it finally comes, carries all of that. Stay. It starts with smell. That is the thing Rhydan won't be able to explain later. Not to Sereth, not to the advisors, not to any record. The world has smell when it matters. Iron from gate chains, damp stone, ash carried from the upper forges. Familiar. Grounding. Except there's something beneath it.
Faint.
Not from the courtyard. Something older. Something that belongs to a different arrangement of objects. A room rather than open air. Wood rather than stone. He blinks once. The courtyard doesn't shift. Elyra is still there. Kane is still watching. And yet, a flicker presses at the edge. Not of his vision, but of something behind his vision. Not sight. Recall. Partial. Like a sentence with the last word missing. A cup. Dark liquid. Bitter. His throat tightens. The taste follows, metallic, wrong, and then the whole thing collapses before it can become a full memory. Rhydan exhales sharply. The courtyard snaps back. Sound returns. But the echo stays. Not outside. Inside. His hand curls at his side, and he doesn't look at Sereth because if he looks at Sereth, she'll see it. That flicker, that fracture, the momentary vacancy in a man who is not supposed to go vacant. Elyra sees it. Her expression doesn't change. But something behind her eyes does just enough. Not recognition of the moment. Recognition of something beneath the moment. Something she expected. Rhydan steps forward again. Slow. Deliberate. The court stills. Kane doesn't move. Elyra does. Half a step back.
Small.
Immediate. That distance again, he's noticed it now, the way she adjusts. Never retreating fully. Never allowing closeness. The pattern is deliberate. He sees it now, and the seeing changes something. Because if she came to be seen, she would stand her ground. If she came to be heard, she would push forward. Instead, she maintains this precise gap between them, like something breaks if it closes. Like she knows what happens if it closes. What did you do? The question leaves him before he can measure it. Not accusation, pressure seeking direction. The question of a man who has found a loose thread and doesn't yet know what unravels when he pulls. Elyra's lips part, then close. Her gaze holds his, then drops just slightly to his chest, then rises back to his eyes. And she shakes her head.
Once.
Small. Final. The gesture doesn't mean I won't tell you. It means something more specific. More damaging. It means the question you're asking is the wrong shape for what actually happened. Rhydan's jaw tightens. The pressure spikes. Not from outside, from the gap in his own memory. From the way the past refuses to align with what's standing in front of him. What happened that night? The words come from somewhere older than strategy. The court shifts, not understanding, but sensing the fracture beneath it. Sensing that the thing being asked isn't political. Elyra doesn't answer. And in that not answering, Rhydan hears everything. The old tribunal chamber. Dust drifting through fractured light from a broken dome above. Kane's night wind pressing against stone. The smell of rain and old judgment. Elyra stands across from him, her cloak torn at the hem, dark with travel. Her hair clings to her jawline. Her eyes are too steady for someone who just opened a wound. Something altered you before the rejection. She'd said it. Rhydan stands with it now. One step forward, stone grinding under his boot. Say it again. Elyra's gaze moves through him, checking something behind his face. I did not say it lightly. You're telling me, he says, each word scraped raw, that I did not choose what I did. The wind threads through the broken arch above. A low whistle, something remembering a voice. She shifts her weight, not retreating. Adjusting under a burden he is only beginning to see the edges of. You chose, she says carefully, but not from a clean mind. The words hit differently than accusation. Accusation gives you something to push against. This takes the ground away. He exhales. Almost a laugh, except there's nothing in it. You're speaking in riddles. There was a court intervention before the public rejection, she says. Not announced. Not recorded. Rhydan's eyes narrow. Intervention. She nods once. A binding influence passed through sanctioned council channels. Not persuasion. Adjustment. Adjustment. The word lands wrong in the chamber. Like metal dropped into still water.
No.
Too fast. Too certain. That's not possible. The council cannot. They did. Her tone doesn't rise. It doesn't need to. Silence. He steps closer, now only a few paces between them. He can see the faint tremor in her fingers, held beneath discipline rather than fear. What did they do to me? She hesitates. That hesitation is worse than denial. Denial is a position. Hesitation is a door being opened slowly because what's on the other side requires care in the carrying. Not erase, she says. Not rewrite. They didn't need to. His throat tightens. They altered your threshold. Your emotional gating during high-pressure counsel. Your perception of loyalty alignment. She pauses. Just enough to skew decision convergence. The words are technical, clinical, but underneath the clinical language is a simpler horror. His choices were never fully his. Rhydan shakes his head once, hard, like he can dislodge it. You're saying I was steered. I am saying your rejection was not made from your unaltered self.
Kane.
The name rises in him. The city. The people. The oath-bound population who once believed the crown would not turn away. Who stood in quiet lines and did not fight because they believed they didn't need to. Rhydan's hands curl slowly into fists. I remember that day, he says lower. Every word. Every objection. Every silence. Elyra steps forward. The first time, memory is not the same as autonomy. That sentence lands deeper than the first one. He looks past her shoulder, at the cracked stone where old judgment inscriptions have been half scrubbed away. Authority reduced to scars. Why tell me this now? Not a question. A requirement. Because you are no longer inside their active reach. A cold realization begins forming. Explain. She inhales.
Slow.
I chose exile the night after your rejection. The chamber narrows. Rhydan's eyes snap back to her. You disappeared before sentencing was finalized. Before you could be forced to confirm what had been done, she finishes. The silence stretches. This time it carries weight instead of emptiness. They plan to use your compliance as precedent, she continues. A lawful crown acknowledgment of Kane's dissolution petition. If I remained within jurisdiction, I would have been required to validate the process under oath. And if you refused, execution.
Simple.
No decoration. Just a fact placed on the table. The wind outside shifts. The chamber answers with a sound of old stones settling after long strain. Rhydan looks down. Then, so you ran. I removed myself, she says, not correcting him, defining the difference. So Kane would not lose its last internal advocate. So the record would not be sealed completely. A pause. I did not abandon you. The words hang between them, unmoving, like they've been waiting a long time to be said in a room without an audience. You let me believe you betrayed me, he says at last. I let you believe what kept you alive within the court structure. That lands differently. Alive, he repeats. There were 3 correction windows after your rejection. If you had questioned the influence too early, you would have been flagged for instability, removed from sovereign function, possibly rewritten. Rhydan's mouth tightens. And you knew this. I saw the pattern forming. Not all of it. Not enough to expose it safely, but enough to understand that silence was the only shield left. A silence follows. Heavy. Different from the ones before. So, you sacrificed your name. Elyra's expression tightens, barely. My name is irrelevant. No, he says. It isn't. You carried Kane's petitions for years. You were the one constant voice in that chamber. He shakes his head. And you walked away. Her gaze drops, not in shame, in calculation. Some old, tired calculation. I carried them because I believed the system could still hear truth, she says. I left because I realized truth was no longer what it responded to. Rhydan's fists loosen. Something strange spreads through him. Not grief, not anger, but their less dramatic cousin. Loss of authorship. The past he's lived through, no longer anchored to his own intent. He looks at his hands. They feel unfamiliar for a moment. So my rejection, he says slowly, was not fully mine. Yes. No hesitation. Just truth, placed without cushioning. He exhales through his nose. Sharp and uneven. Then who, he says, voice tightening, stood inside my mind that day? The second silence. The intentional one. It stretches longer than the first. Long enough for the wind to fade. Long enough for the stone above to creak, as if leaning closer. I do not know all of them, she admits. Only the signature patterns used in the intervention protocol. Rhydan's head lifts. One mark, she says, did not match any sanctioned court branch. He feels it coming before she says it, like the air pressure changing before a storm. It carried authorization weight that should not exist within the current throne registry. He barely hears his own voice. Meaning? Elyra holds his gaze. Meaning someone outside the visible council had access to the king's directive seal. The words settle, then sink, then fracture everything beneath them. Because that isn't bureaucratic corruption. That isn't faction politics. That is someone who is close enough to wear his authority like a second skin. Outside, Kane's wind rises, louder now, like the city pressing its ear to the wall. And for the first time since she spoke, Elyra looks not at Rhydan. Past him. The first bell doesn't ring. It begins as vibration inside the stone, deep, structural, like the kingdom itself is drawing a breath before judgment. Rhydan feels it through his boots, through his bones, through the silence he's still standing in. Inside the oath assembly chamber, everything waits. The tiered seating rises in concentric arcs. Northern houses in silver-threaded cloaks to the left, southern maritime envoys to the right, central council blocks suspended between them like visible tension. Every face turns as Rhydan walks in. Not curiosity. Calibration. He walks alone down the central stone path. No Elyra. No buffer. Only the sound of his steps and the tightening awareness that whatever he says will not remain inside him for even a breath. Above him, The resonance lattice glows faintly in the vaulted ceiling, thin lines of light ready to bind speech into law the moment it's spoken. Sereth takes position behind the council dais. No introduction. No ceremony. The sovereign is present. Rhydan reaches the center platform.
Stops.
He can feel Cain without seeing it, not as a place anymore, but as pressure threaded through every gaze in the room. A city of people who stood in quiet lines and did not shout and believed it would be enough. You are here to finalize continuity declaration under Assembly Convergence Protocol, Sereth says. State alignment status. Rhydan inhales, and the memory of Cain rises, not abstract, not procedural. The petitioners standing in quiet rows. The silence after his rejection. The way no one shouted because they had already decided to endure the outcome. The way he had called that silence obedience, and been wrong. Before I confirm alignment status, he says, and his voice is steadier than it has any right to be, I must acknowledge Cain. A shift moves through the assembly. Structural. Like pressure redistributing inside a sealed vessel. Sereth's eyes sharpen slightly. That is not part of the declared sequence. Rhydan continues anyway. Cain was not a failed petition, he says. It was a governed population whose directive recognition was altered before my rejection. A ripple moves through the council blocks. Breath changes. I did not fully understand my decision at the time of execution, he says. And I will not allow that ignorance to remain embedded in sovereign record. He feels it now, the point where words stop being communication and become irreversible structural input. I acknowledge Cain as an active political identity suppressed under internal directive manipulation. The resonance lattice flickers.
Once. Twice.
As if unsure whether to accept what it just heard. Then it stabilizes. And the chamber reacts, not all at once, but in fractures. A southern envoy stands abruptly. This is an invalidation of treaty continuity frameworks. A northern voice. You are confirming external manipulation of sovereign cognition protocol? Rhydan doesn't flinch. Yes. The word lands like a hammer. Around him, advisors begin rapid signal exchange, hands moving over embedded slate panels, activating containment protocols that are already too slow. Because the statement has entered the system. You cannot unspeak what the lattice has already taken. Rhydan feels it. Not triumph. Not relief.
Loss.
Something closing behind him. A door he cannot reopen. A Northern House delegate rises, slowly. If Cain was suppressed through internal manipulation, then sovereign decisions enacted during that period are legally compromised. A second voice. That invalidates border reallocations. A third. And trade enforcement clauses. The chamber begins to destabilize, not physically, but structurally. Like a map losing its anchor points one by one. Sereth raises one hand. The noise lowers. You have triggered cascade reassessment, he says. The assembly is no longer unified. Rhydan nods once. I know. Then you have also initiated alliance fracture conditions. A pause. And potentially civil petition response cycles. Rhydan absorbs that without reaction. Because something else is happening now. He can feel it in the air before it's spoken. Distance forming, between blocks, between interpretations, between loyalties that were never as stable as they appeared. Then a signal chime from the upper relay tier. Sharp. Urgent. The attendant reads it. Northern houses withdraw recognition of unified Kael'rith authority pending verification of sovereign stability. The chamber does not erupt. It fractures into silence, so dense it feels like impact. Defense alignment protocols, shifting to autonomous posture. Sereth's face tightens, the first time. More signal chimes. Rapid now. Northern Maritime blocks request immediate separation of treaty defense obligations. A pause. Threat assessment elevated to pre-conflict posture. Pre-conflict. War-adjacent language, without declaration. The knife held above the table rather than put away. Rhydan remains still. And in that stillness, he understands something irreversible. Truth did not land cleanly. It fractured the structure that was containing it. This is no longer a declaration issue, Sereth says. Rhydan finishes it quietly. It is a fragmentation event, The chamber is still fractured when Rhydan steps out of Caelrith Keep. Not exited. Expelled by consequence. The air outside feels wrong, too open, too unstructured, like the world forgot how to hold itself together after what was said inside. Behind him, the assembly doors remain open just long enough for the sound of collapsing unity to leak into the courtyard. Then they close.
Slow.
Final. Sereth doesn't follow. No one does. Below, the city's administrative districts begin to pulse irregularly, light signals misfiring, relay towers correcting themselves twice over, as if the system is arguing with its own memory. Couriers moving too quickly. Banners being lowered halfway, then hesitating mid-descent. Rhydan stops at the top step. His hands are still. That surprises him more than anything else. Stillness after rupture. A presence arrives at the edge of his awareness before it speaks. Elyra. She didn't return with Sereth. She simply appears, the way things appear that refuse to belong entirely to any one direction. I thought you left, he says. I did, she replies. That contradiction sits between them without needing to be resolved. He turns. She's a few steps back, cloak shifted slightly, eyes steady, but not softened. Not his. Not anyone's. There's a distance in them that's new, or maybe it was always there, and he's only now able to see it because he's stopped looking through the lens of his own story. You saw what happened inside, he says. I saw. I said it. Yes. The words he expected to repair something don't touch her. They pass through the air between them and arrive on the other side exactly as heavy as they were. The realization settles in his chest. You're not coming with me, he says. It is not a question. Elyra doesn't answer immediately. The wind moves through the courtyard below, carrying fragments of distant orders, voices, counterorders, systems trying to reinterpret authority in real time. You made Cain visible, she says finally. You did not stabilize what follows. So that's it, he says. You observe from a distance now. I never belonged to the outcome, she replies. Only to the truth that preceded it. That distinction cuts deeper than accusation. Accusation asks you to defend yourself. This asks you to understand why defense was never the point. He looks away. Down the steps. A council runner stumbles near the base, catches himself, continues. No one stops anymore. Stopping has been removed from the system. Your statement did not just expose Cain, Elyra says. It destabilized the interpretation layer between provinces. I didn't have another way. She studies him. That is not the same as justification. Silence. He feels it, how every attempt to anchor meaning keeps sliding. Cain was supposed to be the center of this. Now it is the trigger. And he is standing at the origin point of something that has grown larger than him. Do you regret telling me? He asks. She doesn't hesitate.
No.
That answer lands cleanly. Too cleanly. He nods once, accepting something heavier than agreement. Below, a distant horn sounds. Long, low, defensive. The sound spreads through Caelrith like ink through water. I thought saying it would fix something, he admits. Elyra looks at him. Just looks. It was never going to fix, she says. It was only going to reveal scale. Scale, not personal anymore. Not contained. A word that removes you from the center of your own story. He turns back toward the courtyard. People moving without shared reference. Each group responding to different interpretations of the same collapse. He feels smaller watching it. Not less important, less central. Which is harder? Silence stretches. Then Elyra, you still expect belonging from the outcome you created. The sentence doesn't accuse. It diagnoses. Rhydan's throat tightens. I didn't create this alone. No, she agrees. But you are now the reference point for it. That truth is heavier than blame. It removes the distance between cause and consequence. A courier rushes past them up the steps, nearly collides with Rhydan, eyes wide but unfocused. Already carrying instructions he hasn't read yet. The kingdom is accelerating. Not forward. Apart. Rhydan watches him disappear inside. So what now? Elyra's response arrives immediately. Now it spreads beyond you. A pause. And you lose the illusion that it stays contained to politics. That confirms what he's been resisting. This is no longer governance. This is structural break. The difference between a cracked window and a window that no longer exists. He closes his eyes briefly. When he opens them, she is still there, but unbinding from proximity. Not leaving in dramatic motion. Not staying out of loyalty. Just gradually ceasing to belong to the same space. You're still going, he says. I have to trace what comes next outside the court lens. Finality, without declaration. Rhydan steps slightly forward, then stops. He realizes he has no argument left that doesn't belong to the system collapsing behind him. Elyra.
She waits.
He almost asks her to stay. The words form. He can feel their shape in his mouth. They don't leave, because he understands now that staying wouldn't repair anything. It would only reduce distance. And distance is the only honest thing either of them has left. She turns slightly. Not away. Not toward. Aligned with departure. Rhydan, she says softly. A pause. What you chose has already left you behind as well. Not a wound. A completion. She walks down the steps. Not quickly. Not slowly. At the pace of someone who has already decided and is not looking for permission. Rhydan watches her go. Does not follow. Does not call again. Because some pursuits cannot change outcome. They can only change what you look like while trying. Kael'rith Keep is quieter now. Not calm. Quiet like a system recalculating. Quiet like something running its internal checks after impact. The courtyard stones still carry the residual heat of all the movement that's already passed through them. The air smells of ink and cold metal, the scent of a kingdom writing its own instability into record. Rhydan doesn't move at first. He stands where she left him, where she stopped belonging to the same direction. Below, relay lamps flicker in uneven rhythm. Some steady, some stuttering, some dark entirely. The kingdom is still functioning. It just no longer agrees with itself about what functioning means. A distant bell begins to form, then stops halfway through its intention. Interrupted. Like everything else, he steps down one stair, then another. The stone feels unchanged underfoot, which somehow makes everything worse. The world still pretending it knows how to hold weight. A courier passes, slows when he sees Rhydan, continues without speaking. No one stops unless ordered. No one asks unless safe. Rhydan watches him disappear. Exhales.
Slow.
Controlled. It doesn't relieve anything. He walks without direction. The courtyard opens wider than it should, or maybe it only feels that way because the center of it no longer holds anything stable. He stops near a stone basin. Water inside it unmoving. Too still for a kingdom that is breaking. He looks down. His face appears in the surface, fragmented, distorted by faint ripples the wind refuses to finish making. For a moment, he doesn't recognize the man looking back. Not because he has changed, because the version of him that believed in singular decisions is no longer accessible. That version made choices alone in a clean room, and that room doesn't exist anymore. A memory arrives without warning. Kane's silence in the petition hall. Not resistance. Not refusal. Endurance. The quiet of people who had already prepared themselves for the answer, but still showed up, because showing up was what they had. He had mistaken it for acceptance. He'd called it obedience. Now it returns as something else entirely. Choice that was never loud enough to be heard as choice. Rhydan closes his eyes. When he opens them, the reflection is still there. Still broken. Still him. Behind him, footsteps approach and don't stop. Someone lays a sealed report at a distance that respects both rank and rupture. No announcement. Only placement. Only departure. He doesn't turn. He already knows what it contains. He doesn't need language anymore to understand structure. He speaks, though no one is clearly listening. Kane was never the problem. The words don't echo. They sink. He understands something then that he cannot undo even by understanding it. Kane was never asking to be saved. Only acknowledged. The realization doesn't heal anything. It simply removes one layer of confusion and leaves everything underneath exposed. He opens his hand slightly. Nothing there. No object. No symbol. Only memory of decisions that can't be separated from their consequences anymore. He turns slowly away from the basin. The courtyard stretches ahead. It no longer feels like a place where direction matters. Only continuation. Above, the assembly tower windows glow faintly, still active, still processing fractures in governance, still trying to convert instability into structure that will not hold. The kingdom is not falling. It is adapting to incompletion. Rhydan walks, not toward anything, not away from anything, just through what remains. As he moves, he becomes aware of something quieter beneath everything else. Elyra's absence, not as loss alone, but as removed gravity. The space she occupied no longer pulls him toward interpretation. It leaves him only with consequence, and choice that no longer belongs to more than one person. For the first time since the assembly, he understands what cannot be reclaimed. Not Cain, not authority, not even certainty. It is the idea that any of it was ever singular. A wind passes through the courtyard arches, carrying signals from the outer relay towers. Untranslated, unstable. Somewhere beyond Caelrith, borders are adjusting themselves without permission. Rhydan stops walking. Listens. Not for meaning. For direction. There is none. Only continuation spreading outward from a broken center. And in that realization, something quieter than despair. The kingdom is still speaking. It is just no longer speaking one language. He takes one step forward, then another. Far behind him, a relay horn sounds, longer this time, strained at the edge of control. The sound carries across Caelrith Keep and beyond it, toward regions that will not agree on what it means. He doesn't turn. He keeps walking into a future that has already stopped belonging to anyone completely. And behind him, the silence left by Elyra remains exactly where she placed it. Neither absence nor presence, but something that refuses to resolve into either. Something that will still be there when the last horn fades. When the last system finishes correcting itself. When the last banner decides what it stands for. It will still be there. Waiting, the way Cain's people waited, for someone to finally understand that acknowledgment was always the thing. Not salvation. Not repair. Just, asterisk, I see you. I know you were here. I know you were real. Asterisk. Rhydan walks. And the kingdom breathes around him, broken and still breathing. As kingdoms do. Thanks for watching. If this story drew you in, don't stop here. Your next chapter is already waiting. Tap the thumbnail on your screen and keep the journey alive. And if you felt even a moment of it, the tension, the betrayal, the pull of something deeper, don't just disappear. Leave a like. Drop a comment. Let your voice echo inside Royal Crown Diaries. Because every reaction, every word, every click keeps these stories breathing.